So Robert's asking, what are y'all's thoughts on self-defense? I heard a preacher said he don't believe in that.
I would agree with that that professor. And honestly, this is one of the things where I tend to disagree with mainstream Christianity, because Christians seem to be often the ones that are most advocating for guns and gun rights and all those things. And I do very much believe in affirming the Second Amendment and protecting that right, because when that right is taken away, we're not too far from tyranny that will also take away religious freedom. So I very much want there to be freedom for people to bear arms. But when it comes to, do I believe that I should be protecting myself, that I need to defend myself, the answer is no. And Jesus says, like in Matthew 26:15, talks about that he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. If we are counting on our guns to save us, then it could be the guns that will bring our demise. And studies have shown that households that have guns in them are much likelier to result in someone dying if there is a home invasion, because then someone's going to use it. It's going to cause panic and all that. So I Jesus' wisdom is there. And how is a Christian supposed to live? We live by faith, trusting God to fight our battle. As we see in 1 Samuel 17:47, for example, it says, "Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." God will fight our battles, and he'll work amazing miracles to make it happen. For example, the Israelites, when they were marching in to take over Canaan, God's plan was that he would send hornets before the Israelites. So Exodus 23:28, he says, "And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite and the Canaanite and the Hittite from before you." And so the Israelites weren't even supposed to pick up their swords. They weren't supposed to battle to take over Canaan. But it was their lack of faith and their actions that resulted in them having to then have these laborious labor and fights and battles. And God actually has a criticism of David about how much blood he had on his hands. And yet he was guilty of the blood of Uriah, but also David just fought many, 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 many battles. And, we say that's amazing and lift up David for all the battles he won. But I think in God's eyes, there's a little bit of disappointment there, because God would have probably appreciated David to say, "Hey, God, I know you're God and you're amazing. How about you can give us some victories here without even having to lift up a sword?" I think that would have been even something God would have been much more pleased with. And remember, we just read this verse about Lamech, one of descendants of Cain, and he's touting self-defense. Genesis 4:23 says, "Adon Zillah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me." So he's trying to pass off this murder of this younger man and saying, "Oh, it was self-defense." But again, Lamech is not considered a good, upstanding citizen that we should all model ourselves after. So am I saying if one does self-defense that it's a bad thing, that you've sinned greatly and all? Like, no, I'm not saying that. It's coming to what is God's perfect will versus what will God tolerate. And do you want to live a life of what God will tolerate, or do you want to bring yourself into God's perfect will and see miracles happen and really live that life by faith? Again, like the just shall live by faith. So is it a act of faith in God to live by self-defense and to count on guns to protect you? Or is true faith believing that God will work out a solution where hopefully the other person does not end up dead? And maybe they can end up with salvation in the end. So those are my thoughts. Tina, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and I think we're similar. I think I'm a little bit more like I don't have a problem with self-defense if it's truly self-defense, if that makes sense. Because some people are more aggressive and they're like, "Oh, it's self-defense," and it's like, "Well, is that really self-defense? Are you looking for a fight?" So I mean, I definitely believe, God has promises, and, the the Lord has so many promises, and I claim this one every day. Psalms chapter 34, verse 7. It says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around them that fear him and delivers them." And so I definitely think, your first line of defense needs to be Jesus, being your defender and your deliverer. So I think that's 100% on point.
Mhm.
I guess the only thing is, like, I think about, in the Old Testament. Yeah, I think there were a lot of battles that Israel did that wasn't God's will. God talked about they weren't even supposed to have a king. They weren't supposed to be trying to have these glorious battles won. God said, "Yeah, I'll go before you, and I'll send bees, and it'll drive out the
Hornets,
people, and
yeah.
you'll just take the land by my methods, which is a peaceful method, not a method that's violent." And so I don't
Exactly.
think that it's God's will for us to use violence, especially just for our own gain or in any way. And like you're saying, and I think the verse, he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. um to me, I take that to mean like people who kill for a living, like they're going to end up dead, because that's usually the end result of that kind of a lifestyle. But I do think of, I think of the story when Lot and his family were all taken captive, and Abraham went, and God blessed his battle, and he
But
went.
was that self-defense? See,
That
this was interesting. That was actually defense of someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true. And I guess it's more what I mean, as far as, what self-defense. It's like, are you defending yourself, like, I don't know, like, and do you need to
And
shoot somebody? No. I mean,
yeah,
you
and
can
still, if
defend yourself.
Abraham had prayed to God, like, "God, I'd like to rescue Lot, but do it in a way that nobody dies," would it have been would God say, "Hey, I really love that prayer. Let's do an amazing miracle here."
Yeah. And I definitely think God, he tells us time and time again, I will go before you, I will fight for you. And so, but at the same time, I've, heard of people like, well, if someone just attacks you in the street, what do you do? And that's, like I said, I don't think it's a wrong thing to, if someone's trying to grab you. I've had people try to grab me in the street, believe it or not. But I've also seen angels intervene where I was like, I probably should have been kidnapped, or I probably should have been, assaulted in a much worse way. But I know God was with me, and I know, like, there were miracles that happened. And I do believe it's because, I've claimed God's promises, and God has been more than faithful in his deliverance and his promises to me.
And
So,
I just thought of an interesting example of like David. David actually had opportunities to kill Saul when Saul was trying to find David to kill David.
mm,
And David resisted those temptations. He even felt guilty after he cut just a piece of cloth out of King Saul's robe. He felt so bad about that. But and you could say, well, David didn't want to kill Saul because Saul was anointed, was chosen to be God's king for that period of time. But I think even for anybody, God would always like it if we give someone life and the opportunity to come to know God and let God carry out the judgment. And whenever he did that, when David allowed God to carry out judgments, it's always recorded as God was very pleased about that. The only exception is when God actually ordered for someone to be killed. And that's where King Saul was wrong, because God had ordered King Saul to actually like wipe out certain wicked tribes, certain evil people, and Saul would keep the king as like a token, and
yeah.
so, Samuel would have to come and carry out judgment against that person, and that led to the kingdom. That was one of the many things that then led to the kingdom being transferred from Saul to Samuel,
Mhm.
to David.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and I think it goes down to, there's a time and a place for things. Like the Bible says, there's a time to heal and a time to kill, and there's a time for, justice, because there is going to be, our justice system, does call for, justice to be served to some people. But again, um, do we need to go around being vigilantes and trying to, bring judgment around? No, I don't think that's true self-defense. But, should we, take care of ourselves, and, if someone's trying to attack us, we shouldn't just let them attack us. We should, try to get away. And, I'm not saying we accept abuse. I think that sometimes that's what people think. Oh, Christians should just, let people hurt them. No, we're not doormats. I don't think that's
Yeah.
also biblical either.
Yeah. But
So,
also, this concept of militant Christianity is a very dangerous one, and really goes contrary to the model that was set for us by
Mhm.
Christ. So,
oh no, for sure. Yeah, I don't think we should be a military force to be reckoned with. I don't think that's what God's calling us to either. But I think, there's always a balance. I think there's always these extremes that are both very dangerous. And I think we have to make sure we're, in harmony with God, that, God is our defender, definitely first and foremost. But do we need to use practical wisdom, to avoid problems and to, just protect ourselves in practical ways? I think that's
It's important.
And yeah, and I think like I've been in a situation before where I felt like there was a threat coming in my direction, and God prompted me to take certain action to protect myself from that or prevent that from happening. And it, was it violent or aggressive? No, but it was for my protection. And so I don't think there's a if a dangerous thing is coming, person or someone is coming towards you and God says run, you probably should run. Like, you're protecting yourself in doing that, but you're also following the prompting of the Holy Spirit to run. If so that kind, and sometimes it can be as simple as, speaking a boundary. I had that situation where this guy was coming straight from I was at a gas station working, about to check out, and like this guy is like charging right towards me, and it was very threatening feeling, and I put up a boundary and he deterred. Like, I spoke a word like stay away, and he went, oh, and like redirected himself instead of coming for my purse. And so I think that is a level of self-defense, but I also feel that I was in harmony with,
Yeah. Usually we talk about
being-
self-defense, though. We're talking about deadly force
right.
against another person.
And that's the thing. It just all depends where you draw the line and what, I think it's something that just everyone has to pray about individually. That's kind of where I'm coming to with it. That
Yeah.
there are certain situations that something might apply that in another situation may not apply. And
Yeah.
so,
I mean, if someone is coming at you and wants to kill you or somebody else,
or
they
sexually harm you.
have essentially forfeited their right to live. And if you take them out, I mean, it's like, what's better, you or them? And but still, it's any loss of life is a tragic thing. And we follow the way, the truth, and the life. We are people of life, and really, our goal should be to find alternatives or work with God, let God work a solution where life is preserved.
Yeah, I think that's definitely as much as possible, but I think you're right in that there are certain situations where it's just, I've heard of other situations where a man was coming to, attack this woman or her family, and then she called the police, he ran away, and so they didn't do anything. But then later he came back and was trying again to kill them, and so she literally defended herself, and the man lost his life in the process. And in those cases, I'm just like, I think that some, serious self-defense is somewhat justified, just because, you're not just defending yourself, but you're protecting innocent people like your children. And so in those cases, every situation, like you're saying, is
defense
different.
of others is, I think, biblically a different scenario.
And I think you're right in that too.